Part 140. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1391. Man Bao coughed lightly, and said to Teacher Mo seriously, "Teacher, I have the sun here, isn't there solar energy?" "Huh? Are you talking about the old model? But that kind of medical warehouse has limited functions, so it's not impossible, but you can massage it even if you lie in it, and you don't have any medicine." Teacher Mo said, "Although many medicines are very cheap here, many of them cannot be sent to you. The exchange of materials in the teaching room is controlled by the encyclopedia. Once the amount of exchange is too much, it will be judged as smuggling. Suspect, so I still mean that, such opportunities are limited, you have to buy something suitable for your era." Keek also suggested this. It grew up with Manbao in this world, understood the world, and bought a medical warehouse. Except for Manbao to lie down secretly and feel the feeling, who else can use it? She just can let others use it, and it doesn't dare. Once it is found to be abnormal, the host may be hacked to death. It's not that the system has encountered such a thing. In the end, the host dies, and the system will also deduct most of the points for not being able to guide the host well. Although it is not afraid of being deducted points now. But these points are also hard earned by it, and it still wants to send Manbao back to the Alliance later, but it doesn't want to wander in space. Seeing Keek repeating, Manbao couldn't help asking it in his heart, "Who are you on?" Keek said, "I just tell you that you are now eligible to exchange medical warehouses, but from your actual situation, I do not recommend you to exchange medical warehouses." The two talked about the medical warehouse for a while, and Keek suddenly said, "Someone is here." Manbao quickly greeted Teacher Mo and exited the system. Sanya knocked on the door and came in, put the wooden basin on the shelf next to her, and asked, "Little aunt, what are you doing in the house? I've been knocking on the door for a long time." "Nothing." Manbao touched the water and hissed, "It's really hot." Sanya smiled and said, "There's no hot water in the kitchen. It's newly cooked. I think it's so cold, so it's better to scald it." Manbao Zhaoshui washed his hands first, nodded and said, "It feels good." After she washed her face and hands, Sanya picked up the wooden tub and went out. Seeing that she was about to close the door, she said, "Little aunt, it's about time for dinner." Manbao had already closed the door and shouted, "I know, I'll go when I change my clothes." She hurriedly entered the system to talk to Teacher Mo. "Okay, I haven't figured out what to change." Seeing that she had listened to their opinions, Teacher Mo and Keek breathed a sigh of relief. Teacher Mo hurriedly urged, "Be sure to find out if you still have the stone, it's best to collect them all." Manbao responded and asked, "That potion? I just placed an order, I will make it overnight, and I can give it to you the day after tomorrow at the latest." Manbao was slightly surprised, "So soon?" Teacher Mo said, "The patient's condition is not serious. It should be that the irradiation time is not frequent, and the genes have not been affected, so as long as the rejection is sufficient, this medicine is not difficult to make." Manbao nodded, relieved. Changed clothes after exiting the system. As soon as the door was opened, Bai Shan was waiting for her not far away. Manbao couldn't help but paused slightly and stepped forward. But Bai Shan didn't ask anything, nodded to her and said, "Let's go, Grandma and the others are waiting." Manbao was surprised, "Are Grandma Lu and the others also?" She thought they had returned to early Lane. Bai Shan explained, "Grandmother and the others went directly to early Lane, and they rested there. They heard that you haven't come out since you entered the palace, so they came to check it out. Seeing that you came back safely, they were relieved." He said, "It's just that it's time for dinner, so I'll stay for dinner together." Manbao nodded. There were 2 tables in the main room. There was no way. Several families gathered together. Brother Xiang Mingxiu was also there. After Man Bao came in, he greeted everyone and asked about Xiang Mingxiu's feet before sitting down beside Bai Shan. Mr. Zhuang asked her, "Is the prince all right?" Man Bao paused for a while and then shook his head, "It's okay." Mr. Zhuang took a deep look at her, didn't ask any further, just nodded and said, "Let's eat, everyone is tired today, let's go to rest after dinner. Everyone should get down." So Mr. Zhuang asked Mrs. Lu modestly, and the two of them moved their chopsticks after a little modesty, and everyone picked up the bowls and chopsticks to eat. After eating, Mrs. Lu sat for a while, then patted Manbao's head, and got into the car with Mrs. Zheng. Zheng put down the car curtain, sighed and said, "Mother, there are so many people here, why don't you let Shanbao live with us?" Mrs. Lu said, "Mr. Zhuang is here. Shanbao can learn something by living with him. We can't let Mr. Zhuang live with us, right? Both the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law are widows, otherwise Mr. Zhuang would not have been staying with Master Bai when he was in Qilai village, and he would have to rent the yard on Changqing Lane alone when he arrived in the capital. It is very inconvenient for them to live in a yard." Mrs. Lu said with a smile, "There are many advantages to having more people. Don't you see that Shanbao is getting more and more cheerful now?" Zheng Shi thought about it too, so he didn't mention it again. Mrs. Lu, now that he and Man Bao are also engaged, he has no scruples, so let them go with these things. Mrs. Zheng responded. Bai Shan sent his grandmother and mother away, turned around and walked into the house side by side with Man Bao. He said, "They have arranged the three heads, there are enough rooms at home, but there are not enough beds. We will go to the street tomorrow to buy two more the bed. There are two empty rooms in the front yard, there is only one bed in it, and when I buy a new bed and come back, it will be much more spacious in one place." He said, "I told my grandmother that there is no need to leave a lot of servants here. Except for the concierge and a coachman, only Aunt Rong and two assistant chefs are left. We can do other things ourselves." Man Bao nodded. "There is a well in the backyard, and they don't need to carry water. They can do things like cleaning the yard and washing clothes. In the past, the servants in the yard were mostly to protect them, but now it's unnecessary. When Daji comes back, even the driver doesn't need to stay. Of course, that's what they're thinking now." Arya entered the room the most. After the old Zhou family bought the restaurant, the big head and the second head moved to the restaurant. At that time, Arya moved out of the Man Treasure house and lived in the room they vacated. Now Sanya has moved in and lived with Arya. The sisters have always been good friends, and their work and rest are similar. They don't need to be separated. They sleep directly on the same bed, but use a screen to separate the inner room and the outer room. Knowing that they were going to buy a bed tomorrow, the two of them thought about adding a desk, which would be useful for bookkeeping and homework. Friday Lang could only add this one to the list of additions. Daji's room is still reserved for him. His room is facing Bai Shan, and he will stay there when he comes back. The room facing Manbao's west wing is used by Friday Lang and Saturday Lang, but they rarely come back after they live in restaurants. Xiang Mingxiu has been living in the house since he came to his home to recover from his injuries. See you at 9. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1392. The three rooms in the east wing are occupied by Bai Shan and the others. One room per person. Behind the east wing is a small garden. The small garden goes down, and next to the main hall are the kitchen and two small rooms. The well in the home is near the small garden. The small yard that Bai Dalan and others rented next door only had one entrance, which happened to be in the same row as their small garden. The reason why this house is like this is that I heard that it used to belong to the same family. It used to be a big house with two rows and two entrances, but it was separated later. One family also sold the house and moved away, and the one who bought the house listed it for rent with the original family. On their side of the front yard, In addition to the concierge where the concierge lived, there was also a firewood room, a main room, two main rooms and a wing room. As soon as I entered, the room was previously occupied by servants, but now the servants have moved out and most of them are empty. Santu and Situ went to live in Shiro's original place to rest temporarily, and Bai Shan planned to buy a bed and add it to the two main rooms in front, so that in the future Wu Lang and the others would also have a place to live when they came back from the shop. And when Daji comes back, he will bring his wife and children, and he has to make another room for him. After listening to Bai Shan's careful planning, Man Bao couldn't help but give a thumbs up and said, "It's fine for you to call the shots." Bai Shan made a decision, then it's settled. Tomorrow, Brother Friday and the others will go to the street to have a look. Do you want to join us? Man Bao shook his head, "I'm afraid I won't be free." She promised the prince to make the antidote, although she didn't do it, but she couldn't ask 3 questions, so she had to read the information at home, and she had to take a good attitude. She was really making the antidote. Man Bao frowned and said, "If you pass by Ji Shitang, you can ask for leave for me, and say that there is something in the palace, and I can't go to the hall for a while." Bai Shan nodded. He was just about to ask quietly what was going on in the palace. Wu Lang walked over, stared at the two of them for a while, and said, "Man Bao, did you go into the palace today or not? What's the matter?" Man Bao shook his head, "No." Friday Lang was relieved, nodded, and then walked away, but before leaving, he couldn't help but remind the two of them, "It's dark, it's very cold, I'll talk about it tomorrow, go to rest first." Bai Shan and Man Bao nodded together. When Bai Shan saw that he was gone, he turned his head and was about to ask a question, but his head came out of the wing next to him again, holding the quilt in his arms. He paused when passing by the two of them, turned his head and asked, "Little ant, your entry into the palace today went well?" Bar. Bai Shan. Man Bao nodded and said, "Going well." Data nodded, hugged the quilt but didn't leave. He glanced at Bai Shan, and then at Man Bao, and said quietly, "It's cold, Auntie, you have been traveling for so many days, it's time to take a good rest, don't stay too long." Bai Shan and Man Bao nodded together. After Data left, Bai Shan K wanted to talk to Man Bao. Arya pulled Sanya back from the front yard. Seeing the two of them sitting in the yard, she asked, "Little ant, are you still asleep?" Bai Shan stopped immediately and waited for her to continue. Arya really grabbed Sanya and asked Man Bao, "Little ant, when you entered the palace today, did the nobles in the palace lose their temper?" Man Bao continued to talk nonsense with his eyes open, shook his head and said, "No." Arya breathed a sigh of relief, looked at the two of them and said, "Little ant, go to sleep, you must be exhausted today. Young Master Shan, go to rest as well." Man Bao held back his laughter and nodded with Bai Shan, who had a calm face. When they were gone, Bai Shan turned to look at Man Bao. Man Bao waited for a while, and when he saw that he didn't speak, he smiled and asked, "What do you want to say?" "Bai Shan, I want to see who else is coming." Bai Erlang and Santu Deng Deng ran from the front yard and said hello when they saw them. Santu was going to follow Bai Erlang into the house, but when he saw that the two people in the yard were sitting still, he stopped. "Step down." Bai Shan looked at them with round eyes. Bai Erlang looked puzzled, scratched his head, looked at this, then looked at that, then shook off his three-headed hand and said, "Then wait here, I'll get it for you." Bai Shan asked, "Take what?" "Take the quilt. I have extra quilts there. The quilts for their uncles and nephews are not enough to sleep together. I will get them a bed." After all, Bai Erlang ran into the house and rummaged through the boxes to find the quilt. Santu stared at the two of them for a while and then asked, "Little ant, have you been bullied when you entered the palace today?" "Man Bao, you don't care about adults' affairs, children." Santu was not convinced. "I'm 2 months older than you." Man Bao can only answer, I didn't get bullied, everything is fine, especially smooth. Santu nodded, glanced at Bai Shan again, and said, it's too cold, you must be tired too, go back to the house and go to bed. Man Bao couldn't help but burst out laughing. Bai Shan. With luck, he got up and said, let's go to the study and talk. Man Bao nodded. Mr. Zhuang was in a bad mood and went to bed early, while his brother Xiang helped make the bed in the front yard. The study had been exposed to the wind all afternoon, and Bai Shan and the others had also scrubbed it, and Xiang Mingxiu had used it frequently this month, so it didn't look dirty. On such a cold day, the night wind was blowing, but Bai Shan propped up the window and turned to look at Man Bao. That's it, I can talk in peace for a while. Man Bao sat in a chair and looked out. There was no one in the yard, some people were resting, and some people were still busy. She said, I'm afraid I've been a little busy recently. My fifth brother and the others can arrange it, but they don't know much about the school. Bai Shan knew what she wanted to say, nodded, and said, don't worry, I will inquire about the school. Man Bao breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, thank you very much then. Lord Bai Shan waved his hand like, I am their uncle, I should have done it, no need to thank me. Man Bao. Bai Shan turned around and went out. After a while, he came back with the teapot, poured her a cup of tea, and said, let's drink some tea and talk slowly. What happened in the palace? Man Bao thought about it while holding the tea. She didn't hide it from him, she lowered her voice and said, the prince is poisoned. Bai Shan was shocked. Man Bao let out a breath and whispered, I promised them that I won't tell anyone else. Bai Shan nodded and said in a low voice, husband and wife are one, I'm not someone else. Man Bao, shy and not ashamed, we haven't gotten married yet. It counts as a marriage, Bai Shan argued in a low voice, and then asked, can you cure the poison? After hesitating for a while, Man Bao shook his head and said truthfully, I have an antidote, but I can't. Bai Shan was stunned, that's... He reacted with hindsight, glanced at the top of her head and asked, is it Uncle Joe? See you tomorrow. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1393. Man Bao didn't nod his head, but he didn't shake his head. Bai Shan, who was used to it, came to a conclusion, that's it? Bai Shan couldn't help but wonder, what kind of poison is that? It's so powerful that even Xiao Yuanzheng and the others didn't find it? Man Bao carefully described the appearance of the stone, and then said, it is said that if you live near that stone, even if you are not exposed to light, you will be poisoned, you will become weaker day by day, and there may be nosebleeds. He lost his hair, then got weak without noticing, and died. Bai Shan opened his mouth wide, so poisonous. Man Bao nodded, but this poison is still undiagnosed, so even if the doctor sees the stone, he can't tell whether it is a poison stone or not. Such a powerful poison, how do you explain to them that you know how to cure it? She couldn't say that the antidote was given by her own father, right? Man Bao said, I am also distressed. This antidote is not easy to make. I can't make it now, so I can only use ready-made ones. Bai Shan rolled his eyes and said, I have a way. You tell me the toxicity, and I'll figure out a prescription for you that no one else can make. Man Bao blinked, thoughtfully, I can't tell you until I've learned it. The two reached an agreement. Seeing that her expression was still a little worried, Bai Shan asked, what else is there? Man Bao nodded his toes and said nothing. Bai Shan stretched out his hand to hook her finger and said, come on, what else is there to avoid between you and me? Man Bao muttered, how do you know I'm in trouble? Since there is already an antidote for the poison in the Crown Prince, why are you so worried? Bai Shan said, there were so many favorite dishes on the dinner table just now, but you only ate a bowl of rice. Man Bao did not expect that he was so worried that he even ate less food. She sighed deeply and said, don't mention it, Prince He. Man Bao pondered for a while and said, it's weird. When I didn't say that he was poisoned at first, he was angry, but he was polite, but after knowing that he was poisoned, he went crazy. Although, he knew that he was smashing things like crazy before he was poisoned, but after knowing that he was poisoned, he sat quietly and didn't speak, and it seemed to be normal. But Man Bao always felt that the smashing prince was safe, and the silent prince sitting on the ground was even more terrifying. Man Bao first took a careful look out the window, and then whispered about the changes in the prince today and her feelings in her heart. What disturbs me the most is the words that the crown princess said when she sent me out. Man Bao whispered, I always feel that the crown princess is deliberately trying to distance herself from me. She used to be kind to me. Every time she came out of the palace, she would give me something, even if she didn't give me the cloth, she would ask the kitchen to prepare some delicious food for me to take with me. She was very considerate. Man Bao lowered his voice and said, but this time, she even specifically told Eunuch Wu not to let Eunuch Wu send me. Although there is some suspicion of narcissism, Man Bao felt that the crown princess seemed to be protecting her by doing so. But before, the princess wanted to tell the world that she belonged to the East Palace, and she was on the same boat as the prince. Man Bao raised his eyes, and his big eyes looked at Bai Shan, who was on the opposite side, and Bai Shan just raised his eyes to look at her. The two of them looked at each other and couldn't help swallowing their saliva. They were a little scared, and they didn't know if they were nervous or scared, and their little hearts thumped a few times. Bai Shan was in the situation of entering the East Palace. He couldn't help pinching Man Bao's fingers, and said softly, if the purpose of clearing the relationship is not to hurt you, then what the East Palace wants to do, it may be destroyed, and this can hurt you. 1. The doctor who treats people. Otherwise, the Crown Prince's mansion wants to frame you, so it's better to take advantage of this moment. Bai Shan stared at Man Bao and asked, which one do you think it is? Man Bao hesitated for a moment and then said, although I am young, I think my feelings are still accurate. I don't think the prince and the prince concubine are trying to harm me. Even the prince, he seems to be trying to distance himself. Bai Shan nodded and said, although the crown prince is not good, he is quite upright. The two sat opposite each other, and Man Bao couldn't help poking him with the fingers he was holding, and asked, then what do you say? Bai Shan lowered his eyes and said, the prince's problem is that he can't give birth to children. Are you sure you can cure his infertility? Man Bao said, as long as he is obedient. Bai Shan whispered, then let the crown princess get pregnant before he starts. As long as he has a child, he will naturally not think about starting again. He said, he wants to do the things of the king of Yizhu, but because he thinks he can't give birth to children, and he is being pressed step by step, if he doesn't do something, his life will not last long, but as long as he has a child, he will. The predicament is now over. Man Bao nodded, and then sighed, so is the third prince, how can he be so bad? The prince is his own brother, after all, he is a compatriot of his mother, even if he competes for the throne, he even poisoned the prince. Bai Shan thought for a while and shook his head, it's not necessarily the poison of the third prince. Huh? Man Bao asked, are the other princes also going to rob the prince? Bai Shan just clicked her nose and smiled, the battle for imperial power has never been just about princes. Some people just don't want to fight, and some people will push them to fight. Look at these historical books we read since childhood, there are how many people say that they want to be emperors in the future. He said, in the beginning, people are the most simple, but when people grow up, they have desires, or they themselves, or the people around them push him forward. Man Bao was thoughtful. Bai Shan's still immature face showed a deepness that did not match his age. He said, I think, when the prince and the third prince were young, they were brothers and sisters. I don't know what happened in the front yard, but there was the loud laughter of the big ones, and the joy was even felt by Man Bao in the study. She couldn't help turning her head to look out the window, looking straight at the front yard, and ask softly, will these brothers and sisters in my family become like this in the future? Bai Shan also looked out, and after a moment of silence, he said, a good family style will always last longer, but no matter how long it is, there will be ups and downs. He said, if you don't look at the aristocratic families in the clan chronicle, just look at our Bai clan, which has been ups and downs for hundreds of years, when there are brothers, friends, and brothers, and there are times when the descendants are unworthy, otherwise the Tang family will not branch early. When we go out, my family will not avoid Qilai village. We can also take care of ourselves, and the affairs of future generations should be left to future generations. Man Bao also retracted his mind. Although the two are smart, they are still young, and their sadness and worries are only temporary, and there is more hope in their hearts. So they put it down after only one word, and they were most worried about the prince's affairs. Next update at 6 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1394. Man Bao's identity is somewhat special. She is a civil doctor, not an imperial doctor. If the prince really wants to be like the king of Yizhu, there will be many people involved. During this period of time, Man Bao will continue to see a doctor to the prince, saying that they are close, they are just a patient relationship, and she is young, she just can see a doctor. She didn't say she was close, but she often went in and out of the East Palace, and knew the prince's body best. And the prince didn't even trust Xiao Yuanzheng of the Taiyuan hospital, and only let her see the doctor alone, which is evident. So, if it really happens, you can implicate her or not, depending on what the superiors think. Obviously, it is more likely to implicate her. Because they have enemies, not to mention the queen mother in the palace and the King Yizhu family, the relatives and friends of those families who were implicated in the King Yizhu case, there are still some people in the DPRK. They have no power or power. If the Empress does not stand on their side, the possibility of them being implicated is too great. And his own son rebelled, knowing that the emperor did not have time to pay attention to them, maybe he himself would anger them. After all, they have guessed it now, but they haven't thought about reporting it yet. Huh? Man Bao whispered, if it's true, do we want to inform? Bai Shan also whispered, if it's true, we'll find an excuse to leave the capital, and the whistleblower will die faster. Keek has been listening to their discussions and couldn't help but ask, host, have you never thought that the prince will succeed? Man Bao said in his heart, don't think about it, do you see which prince in the history books succeeded in rebelling? Today is not the prince, and as far as the prince's rebellion is concerned, he is the only one. Today is not a clay sculpture, don't look at his usual smile, it seems that this is also for the courtiers, and that is also subject to the courtiers, that is his own will. He is the position of the mutiny, and the prince wants to follow his father's old path, unless his father is old and sick, and occasionally takes a nap, there may be a chance of success. Now that the body is strong, the prince wants to rebel, but he chooses early death between early death and late death. But he struggled a bit before dying. Man Bao and Bai Shan took the place of the prince's current situation, and they both understood him somewhat, but they both disagreed. Man Bao couldn't help but muttered in a low voice, if I were him, I would be very good with the queen, let the queen take care of her health, and then watch them jump around, as long as I don't get poisoned, I will be the prince for a day, and I will be old, block them. Bai Shan also nodded, the emperor is just when he is young and strong, and it will not be a problem to live another 10 or 20 years. Take good care of your body. After 10 or 20 years, you don't believe that you will not be able to have children. Man Bao, If you can't have children, you can adopt one or two from the clan, and then let the ministers in the court fight with the emperor. How wonderful! However, living like this must be very suffocating, and it requires the willpower to endure humiliation and burden, but obviously, the prince's temper is not suitable for enduring humiliation and burden. The two quietly complained, and then began to worry. Man Bao said, I can't go to the East Palace to ask the prince and the princess if you are going to rebel. If so, I will hide out of the capital for a while and wait for you. If they fail, they will come back. So how do we know if they are going to rebel and when? Bai Shan pondered, you can't ask others, otherwise, we will be lost forever. He said, not only the East Palace, the emperor will not let us go. And although they are safe now, who knows if there are still people staring at them to find fault. They offended a lot of people unknowingly. Bai Shanming thought hard, he couldn't ask people, and he couldn't show his style in the East Palace. He couldn't just guess that the prince wanted to rebel, right? Man Bao was already sighing, why do we always have something to do with rebellion? Bai Shan's heart moved, and he asked, Man Bao, can Uncle Joe go into the palace by himself? Man Bao was stunned, his eyes widened slightly. Bai Shan clapped his palms together excitedly, and said happily, but I forgot about this. I knew earlier that Uncle Joe should have asked for the news for us. Seeing Man Bao's bitter face, he couldn't help but stagnate and asked, what, can't you? Man Bao was communicating with Keek. After being silent for a while, Keek listed a quotation for her. Man Bao looked at the points and felt sore. Why is it so expensive? Host, the encyclopedia originally restricted this function of the system because it involved the life safety of the host, so I was able to apply for this function with the encyclopedia, but in order to curb the abuse of the host, the main system set a high price. There are also corresponding rules, please abide by the relevant rules. Man Bao blinked, feeling that Keek became businesslike in an instant. She asked thoughtfully, is it because of that stone? Keek replied without emotion, please explain the problem in detail to the host. Man Bao understood, there must be someone, or some main system staring at them at this moment. Man Bao frowned, his consciousness was withdrawn from the system, and he saw Bai Shan sitting upright, looking at him with restraint and curiosity. Bai Shan has quietly withdrawn his hands and is clasping his hands on his knees, looking very well behaved. He showed a very gentle smile and asked softly, Man Bao, is Uncle Joe here? Man Bao didn't answer the question, only said, there is a price to pay. Bai Shan frowned, is it dangerous? Forget it. Man Bao shook his head, I'll figure this out, don't worry about it. But Bai Shan hesitated, if Josiah's soul body is damaged, will it affect his reincarnation? Man Bao scratched his head, if the points are spent too much, it won't affect Keek, but it will affect her. No, it will also affect Keek, but that's a good influence. This function is provided by Keek, so it will deduct a certain amount of points as its own reward. It earned. Man Bao said with a sad face, forget it, I'll take a walk outside and dig some flowers and plants that I haven't seen before. Bai Shan has never been able to understand why Josiah needs so many flowers and trees, and he must have never seen them before. He really can't come up with an excuse for this, but he also knows that she won't tell her the reason if you ask Man Bao. Bai Shan also figured out that the underworld might have restricted Uncle Joe or Man Bao, so that they could not talk about this to a third person. But it doesn't matter if someone else guessed it by themselves. Bai Shan has now learned to guess his intentions by looking at Man Bao's face. Bai Shan looked at Man Bao carefully, and found that although her face was full of pain and sadness, she was not angry or entangled. It shouldn't have done much harm to Uncle Joe. Bai Shan also breathed a sigh of relief. See you at 9. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1395. Man Bao's consciousness sank into the system again, and he couldn't help bargaining with Keek. It costs 10,000 points to record a video for an hour, wouldn't it be too expensive, and in case nothing happens for the hour you recorded? What? Can I just pick and record when they talk secrets? No, Keek said, host, your location is not close to the palace. It is also very energy intensive for me to scan the past, and recording such a large range requires a lot of energy. Man Bao instantly grasped the key point revealed by Keek, and said, you don't want to record it, I just need you to stare at the prince, and only record what happens around him. Keek went out. Man Bao became more and more sure of the guess in his heart, and didn't rush it, let it be quiet. After a long time, Keek's voice sounded in her mind again, host, after research, it was decided to record only the surroundings of Li Chengming. As long as a 10-meter video is within my scanning range, I only need 10,000 points in 24 hours. That's too expensive. When Man Bao was still considering whether to bargain again, her heart trembled, and she instantly replied to him in her mind, okay. Man Bao was relieved, and Keek, who had been very quiet in his mind, did not waver at all. He directly changed the quotation and handed it over to her again. Man Bao first deducted 10,000 points for it, and then said, let's keep an eye on it for a day. Keek's energy spread out, then took it back and said, the target is not within range. Man Bao. Coco didn't explain much. Man Bao consciously exited the system and looked at Bai Shan innocently. Bai Shan asked with concern, how is it, what does Uncle Joe say? Man Bao said, the prince is not in the East Palace now. Where is that? Man Bao shook his head sullenly, it can't go too far. The East Palace is already on the edge of the farthest place it can go. Man Bao finally felt that he was a little lazy recently, and said, I want to buy a mule and a donkey to send to it. Although Bai Shan didn't quite understand it, he nodded and said, okay, I'll buy it. Man Bao took out a piece of silver and gave it to him. Bai Shan glanced at the money in his hand, frowned, but did not push it back, only asked, do you want to buy more? Don't, just head over. It's useless if there are too many. Only the creatures that have not been included will have bonus points when they are included for the first time, and they will be included later. Unless the encyclopedia takes the initiative to release the task, the points given will not be many. She won't do anything that costs money. Bai Shan remembered that he still has a lot to do. Bai Erlang and Santu sent the quilt to the front and came back to see that they had laid the quilt. The light was still on in the study. He couldn't help but ran up and didn't enter the door, he just lay on the window and looked in. What are you talking about for so long? It's agreed that if you want to go out to buy things tomorrow, you have to go to the Imperial College to see the school. What's the matter? My big brother went back there to sleep early, you guys still haven't slept yet. Man Bao immediately got up, sleep? Bai Shan also got up and sent her to the door first, go in and rest, don't think too much. Man Bao nodded and turned to enter the house. Bai Shan waited for her to close the door before turning back to the house, but as soon as he turned around, he saw Bai Erlang looking at him speechlessly. Bai Shan raised his eyebrows, is something wrong? It's all right, I just think you guys are too boring, I live next door, and I haven't seen you take her to the door before, Bai Erlang said, no wonder Santu has opinions on you, and I have opinions on you. Yes, hum. After Bai Erlang hummed, he turned back to his room and slammed the door shut. Bai Shan. He shrugged and turned back to his room next door. Man Bao was lying on her bed and couldn't hear Keek for a long time, so she slowly fell asleep and slept until the middle of the night. Maybe it was detected that she was awake, and Keek suddenly said in a low voice, the prince was gone at that time. The palace, just outside the scanning range. Man Bao woke up slightly, gave a soft and asked, because of that stone, is there a system or someone watching us? Coco didn't answer. Man Bao asked, Keek, you're different, aren't you? After being silent for a long time, Keek said, no one can monitor you beyond my authority, and the main system can only extract my records. Man Bao's eyes flickered slightly, and he closed his eyes and fell asleep peacefully. Keek also silenced, and all of them stopped talking. The next morning, when everyone woke up, it was very lively. Bai Shan gave Mr. Zhuang some water to wash his face. After washing, he changed his clothes and went out. After seeing so many young people in the yard, he realized it with hindsight. Besides, they were all young people. And many more. Early in the morning, everyone was either cleaning the yard, or rolled up their sleeves and went to the backyard to help fetch water. When they saw Mr. Zhuang, they all stopped their movements, bowed and saluted, and called Mr. Except for Santu Sanya and Satu, all the teenagers in the yard had read books under him. However, even if it was 3 heads, 3 girls and 4 heads, they came out of the academy, so it would not be an exaggeration to call him Mr. Also, he gave them their names. Mr. Zhuang nodded, and simply called Weivu Lang and Saturday Lang over after breakfast and asked, what kind of school do you want to find for Lixiu, 3 heads, and Legu, 4 heads? The two looked at each other and turned to look at Man Bao, who was beside him. Man Bao thought for a moment and said, the main thing is to look at Mr.'s knowledge and character are good. Mr. Zhuang smiled and said, I know for the teacher, I will ask someone later. It is still the first month of the month, and most of the schools have not yet opened. In the past few days, they will study with me with Bai Shan and the others. Man Bao's eyes lit up, and he led the 3 heads and the 4 heads to salute together and said yes. Mr. Zhuang was getting old and his energy was a little weak. Man Bao took his pulse and listed 2 medicinal recipes for Ant Rong to make for him. Then he and Bai Shan and others withdrew, and let Mr. Zhuang have a good rest. Mr. Zhuang didn't go out today, and Man Bao didn't go out either. Saturday Lang and the others are closed for 1 day today, and they go shopping with Bai Shan and the others. The group walked directly, without even sitting in the carriage, and left in a mighty manner. Man Bao sent the person to the door, turned around and went back to the house. She closed the door and entered the teaching room to look at the stone, and to learn its composition and the principles of pathological changes caused by radiation. At this moment, the stone was enclosed in a transparent frame, it was suspended in the middle of the frame, and it was slowly rotating. Man Bao leaned over to take a closer look and asked Keek, will I be poisoned now? No, its rays have been blocked. See you tomorrow, woo woo. Tomorrow's update, woo woo. I'm so happy, and so sad, I'm thinking, what I owe, my manuscript box. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1396. Man Bao nodded with satisfaction, and then started to play the popular science video that teacher Mo found for her. It is said that this gem comes from space. It has a very important role in the history of mankind, but why is it important? The video did not say it, or it was cut off. She can't see it now. What she learned directly was its pathological knowledge. Mr. Mo is very generous, and the encyclopedia doesn't seem to mind. Even the preparation method of the potion is shown on the video. Of course, Man Bao has not learned that much for a while. Because she found that in terms of pathological knowledge, she heard many terms for the first time. After listening to a class, Man Bao, who has always been conscious of being extremely smart, even had stars in her eyes and did not understand. Man Bao was dumbfounded. She stared at the video that had stopped in front of her for a while before she regained her senses. She asked Keek to play it again, and after listening to it again patiently, she barely touched the edges. She touched her chin and said, This thing is hard to understand. Coco didn't speak. She said to herself, I don't even understand the pathology, tell the prince and the others, they will definitely understand even more. That's great, it's just something they don't understand. Although his mind was already groggy from thinking, Man Bao shook his head and clicked on the video of making potions. This video has 3 summaries, the principle, the production process, and the reaction process of the drug in the body, which are explained in great detail. But in the same way, most of Man Bao didn't understand. She just watched a video when there was a knock on the door. She opened the door in a trance, and Mr. Zhuang stood outside the door. He was about to take care of Man Bao's entry into the palace yesterday, but seeing her dazed look, he couldn't help asking, "What's wrong?" Man Bao almost burst into tears, and hummed twice, "Sir, medical books are so difficult, I can't understand many of them." "Mr. Zhuang, that's over. If she doesn't understand, he doesn't understand." Mr. Zhuang rubbed his forehead and said, "Would you like to ask a doctor from Ji Shitang, or ask Imperial Physician Zheng and others?" Man Bao lowered his head and shook his head, "They won't understand either." Mr. Zhuang frowned and asked, "Is it the prince's illness?" Man Bao didn't speak, and said to the prince secretly in his heart, "This is what Mr. guessed, not me." Seeing her looking down at her toes, Mr. Zhuang sighed and said, "The crown prince's illness is really not easy to spread, and you can't let people know about it. You can only study it yourself." He also knew some medical principles, and he certainly couldn't help Man Bao in this regard. Mr. Zhuang said, "Let's come out to eat first." He said kindly, "I asked Auntie Rong to make your favorite meat, and I'll ask her to make you some snacks later. It's easy to get hungry, so eat more." Mr. Zhuang looked at Man Bao's cheek and said, "Look, you've all lost weight." Man Bao reached out and touched the baby's fat cheek, and nodded in agreement. She really felt very hungry at the moment, she must have lost weight. She ate lunch, went around the garden again, and then went back to the house to continue her work. The undercover spy who was hiding on a tall building in the distance and staring here saw it, wrote a note and handed it in, while he continued to stare at the opposite side. There are very few high-rise buildings in Changqing Lane, so it is not easy to keep an eye on Jo Man. She is fine when she goes out, what she has done and what she has said can generally be inquired. But if she stayed in the house, she could basically only give a movement. They have a lot of family, but very few servants. They can't even put spies in it, at least not for a while. The spy didn't know that the front foot of the note he gave was taken out of the alley, and the person on the back foot was followed. Then when he looked up, he noticed a flash of light in the corner of his eyes, he froze, rolled on the spot, dodged the attacking sword. Man Bao didn't know that someone was fighting and murdering more than 600 meters away from home. She closed the doors and windows, yawned, patted her cheek, woke up, and went back to the system to study. Keek knew it, but it didn't say anything. In its occasional scan every day, there are too many various things. Of course, it is impossible for it to tell the host. Unless there is an immediate threat to her life, it will not know anything. However, at the moment it is scanning the prince in the East Palace, dutifully recording the prince's daily life. As long as his movement trajectory does not exceed its scanning range, it can follow him to record video. However, the encyclopedia has been staring at it recently. I am afraid that she can't help the host to screen the video for her own sake. She can only watch it bit by bit on her own. Keek doubts whether the host can have that time, after all, she is very busy. Man Bao's eyes were full of stars, and when he was about to vomit out, Teacher Mo finally went online, and with him there was a tube of azure potion. He said to Man Bao, "This is the antidote, come on, although it's fake, but since it's made, I'll give you a lecture by the way." Man Bao looked unlovable and said, "Teacher, I finally know why people who can't learn homework hate class so much." Teacher Mo. Although Man Bao was hit hard, she still sat opposite teacher Mo, took out her notes, and acted as if she was listening. Ms. Mo has already turned over the records of her class today, and said after a pause, "Forget it, I will briefly explain the harm of these radioactive substances to the human body with you, and then talk about the principle of making this medicine." There is a big difference between video lectures and live lectures. The videos that Mr. Mo uploaded to the teaching room before are popular science videos that can be seen everywhere on the internet in their world. They feel that it is very simple, but for Manbao, who has never heard of many terms, it is difficult to understand them. Not to mention, there are still many principles and formulas that have not been explained. But Mr. Mo's personal explanation was different. He knew that there were many things Manbao had not learned yet, or in other words, they hadn't thought about learning those things from the very beginning. Because she doesn't need it. Mr. Mo pulled down a black curtain, held a tube of colored brushes in his hand, and taught directly on the curtain, "You don't need to understand all these terms, just use some characters that you understand to understand. For example, this is what you said. Of stone, you may call it a gem, this substance is X." Manbao stayed in the room until the evening. When the lively sound from outside woke her up, she just took the book and applied for the medicine in the teaching room. Maybe teacher Mo tacitly agreed, or maybe it was because the encyclopedia had already reached a consensus, and she passed the application. The medicine was kept in Keek's system space. Manbao just went out with the notebook. She put the notebook on the table, opened the door and went out, and saw Datu and the others moving things to Arya's room. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1397. Little sister, are you out? Manbao stood at the door and asked curiously, "How many things did you buy?" Zhou Lizhong, big head, said, "Not much, they are all bought from the second-hand market, and the wood used is ordinary, so it is not expensive." Manbao said, "Where did you find it?" "The fifth uncle took us there." Zhou Lizhong moved the chair inside and paused in front of Manbao. "Little aunt, are you really all right?" Manbao shook his head. "It's all right, why are you asking that?" Zhou Lizhong looked at Manbao's face, and slowly shook his head after a while. "It's okay." Arya and Sanya personally carried their precious desks in, and Santo stood in the middle to help. When everyone entered the backyard, they were shocked to see Manbao, and Santo quickly said, "Little aunt, I haven't seen you for a few hours, why are you so haggard?" Bai Shan and the others who came in from the outside with their belongings were also stunned. Manbao looked at their large and small bags, and was equally astonished. "How many things did you buy?" Bai Shan and others, "What happened to you?" Manbao sat in front of the bronze mirror and looked closer, only to find that her face was a little haggard, and her eyes were still a little blue. Bai Shan was a little worried. "Aren't you fine when you went out in the morning? Did something happen again?" Manbao shook his head sadly and sighed. "It turns out that it's such a feeling that I can't study well. I won't talk about Bai again in the future." Bai Erlang on the side. He said angrily, "What does this have to do with me?" Manbao sighed and said, "I'm learning a new medical skill today, and I can't even learn it. I've only touched a little bit since I was thinking about it in the morning. It's so difficult." The tone was too familiar, and it was what Bai Erlang said every time he couldn't remember the newly learned text or didn't understand it. Bai Erlang looked at Manbao hesitantly, suspecting that she was mocking him, but seeing that her expression was indeed sluggish, he believed it a bit and hummed, "Now you know my pain." Manbao nodded and understood, so it was very painful. Bai Erlang asked with a light cough, "Why is it so difficult to treat?" Manbao didn't answer him. He shoved the notebook on the table into Bai Shan's arms, and said, "Take a look and figure out a fantastic recipe for me. It's okay if you don't understand, I think it's okay to say it. Yes, things like nouns can be replaced by something by yourself, as long as you can distinguish them." Bai Erlang on the side coughed twice and asked, "Who is it?" Bai Shan tapped him on the head, "You're quite clever now. Can't you see that she's coughing?" After that, he took the book and left. Bai Erlang followed behind and turned out of the room, complaining, "Who are you lying to? This geek is obviously a person, and you have something to hide from me." He probably knew that Man Bao was tired now, so Bai Erlang went to pester Bai Shan. Man Bao looked at himself in the bronze mirror, rubbed his face, and ran to watch the fun to clear his mind. Wu Lang and the others bought a lot of things. The two beds are placed in the two main rooms in the front yard, and the beds are very wide when they are side by side. 5 or 6 people in a room is no problem. Because the capital was cold, Wu Lang also bought 3 quilts, as well as various odds and ends, such as wooden basins, wooden barrels and shelves. Knowing that Li Shui and Li Gu wanted to study, they also replaced 3 desks, one was placed in Aria's room, and the other 2 were placed in the study, directly behind Bai Shan and Man Bao. Bai Erlang didn't like it when he saw it. In this way, wouldn't he be left alone on the other side? Originally, Bai Shan and Man Bao were sitting on one side, but he was unhappy just by putting him on the other side. How could the 4 of them be there now? And the desks of the 2 of them are still so big. It is a desk for 2 people to sit on, unlike their small desk for 1 person, so he objected to move his desk out, and then sit with Zhou Lixiu and the 2 brothers. He used to have a good time with Santu in the village. It was a little strange to go out for 2 years, but in the 10 days of coexistence, they formed a deep friendship, so he wanted to sit with Santu. Zhou Lixiu winked at him, and he didn't want to sit down with his sister-in-law and Bai Shan. He felt that the pressure was too much. Mr. Zhuang was standing at the door of the study, and when he heard the noise they couldn't settle down, he said, "Let's change the study." Then he stood at the door and instructed Bai Erlang to move out the tables and chairs, remove the books from the bookshelves, and move the bookshelves to the tea room on the right. There was originally a place for drinking tea. There was a wooden couch. There was a low table on the couch. It was leaning against a window. Usually, Mr. Zhuang liked to lean on the couch to drink tea and take a nap when he was tired from reading. When Bai Shan and the others went out, most of the time, Xiang Mingxiu accompanied him to drink tea and chat. After all, although the yard is good, it is very cold on a cold day, so it is better to be more comfortable in the house. Friday Lang and the others rolled up their sleeves to help. The bookshelves were originally placed around the wall, which made the room seem to have a lot of space. At this moment, he removed the curtain separating the tea room and the study space here, and directly moved the bookshelf on the left against the wall, separating the 2 sides like a screen, leaving only one passage for entry and exit. Then arrange the desks up and down near the left wall according to the appearance of the school. Mr. Zhuang greeted him specially, and put the 2 long desks in the front 2 rows. Bai Shan and Man Bao's desks were in the 3rd row side by side, and Bai Erlang's small square table was in the back. Before Bai Erlang was happy, Mr. Zhuang said to him, "You and Li Shui sit in the 1st row, while Li Gu and Li Ru, Sanya, sit in the 2nd row." Not to mention the people in the study, even Bai Shan, who had just put down his medical skills and ran over, couldn't help lowering his head and holding back his laughter, and said to Bai Erlang, who was full of shock, "It's called stealing chickens without losing money." Bai Erlang can only slowly move his things to the desk in chapter 2 with a bitter face. He doesn't want to sit right under the nose of his husband. Zhou Lixiu didn't want to either, but he looked before and after, and decided to obey. Bai Erlang muttered and resisted while slowly moving things. "Situ and Sanya are younger than us, why don't they sit in the 1st row?" Mr. Zhuang said quietly, "If you want to learn medical skills with Manbao, you will naturally have to do it closer." He lifted his eyelids and glanced at him and said, "And you and Bai Shan Manbao often fight, so it's good to separate you." He didn't believe it. With Zhou Ligu and Zhou Liru apart, the 3 of them could still quarrel. Facts have proved that if they really want to make a noise, they can make a noise across a room. Just after dinner, Bai Shan and Bai Erlang stood in the corridor and quarreled. Man Bao was too sleepy at the moment. She had to think about the words of the prince when she went to the palace tomorrow, so she opened the window to meet the two of them. Humanity, if you quarrel again, I will give you Huanglian. Bai Shan and Bai Erlang. Seeing that they were restrained, Man Bao was satisfied, and closed the window and muttered, "Humph, if you have eyes but don't know gold and jade, Huanglian is on fire." Bai Shan and Bai Erlang looked at each other, snorted at each other and turned back to the house. Bai Erlang went to sleep, while Bai Shan went to think of a prescription. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1398. Early the next morning, Man Bao woke up from the bed, first took the medicine from the system, found a clean porcelain bottle and filled it with medicine, and then glanced at the video recorded by Keek yesterday. She forgot, yesterday used too much brain, obviously the body is very sleepy, but the brain is twitching, and I can't sleep well at all. She thought that she was going to enter the palace today, so she didn't dare to watch it. Man Bao sighed and clicked to pay 10,000 points again to make Keek stare at the prince, and decided to wait until she came out of the palace to watch the video before deciding whether to continue paying points. Man Bao corked the porcelain bottle and put it in the medicine box. Then he stretched out and took the wooden basin to go out. Early in the morning, there was a long line in the kitchen to get hot water. After washing up, Man Bao patted his face, turned around to fetch water for Mr. Zhuang to wash his face. The first three people in the first row let her cut the line, and went to the end by himself. Bai Erlang yawned and lined up behind her. Man Bao turned back and said to him, "Tomorrow it's your turn to serve Mr." Bai Erlang always felt like he wasn't getting enough sleep, and his eyes were about to burst into tears. He turned his head to look at Santu and the others who gave up his seat to Man Bao, and said, "You've all studied with Mr., and you all have to serve Mr. If the teacher has something to do, the disciple will do it, understand?" The three had said that there was no problem, and the fourth had said, "But you still have to go first, and it will be you tomorrow." Bai Erlang yawned again and asked, "Are you all sleepy?" Santu was used to it. "I'm used to it. If we dare to stay in bed, my grandfather will use a fire stick to beat us out of the bed." He said, "My grandfather said that he can't sleep late even when he is old. Why should we sleep when we are young?" Man Bao kept silent, poured hot water from the pot into the wooden basin, and walked away. He couldn't help but complain. The aunts and aunts in the village talked a lot, saying that her father was the laziest in their family. When she was young, she couldn't move, but she even went backwards when she was thinking. It was all her mother who pulled so many children up. I don't know how her mother trained her father. Although her father is still stingy, he will not be too lazy. Mr. Zhuang washed his face, cleaned his hands, handed the wooden basin to Man Bao, and pondered a little. "You must be cautious in your words and deeds when entering the palace today." Although he didn't know what was going on in the palace, Man Bao never hid his thoughts. Yesterday, she stayed in her own room for a day and was so haggard that she wouldn't believe anything without him. It's just that the children are getting older, so he doesn't want to ask questions. Man Bao opened his mouth and almost talked about the prince's poisoning, but he closed his mouth after thinking about it. It was useless to tell the husband about this, but it made him worry, and let Donggong know that the husband also knew about these things. Maybe it would be dangerous to the husband. Man Bao nodded and went out to pour water with a wooden basin. There is a large stone jar behind Bai Erlang's house by the corner of the wall, which is dedicated to the sewage after washing. It is poured into it, and it can be used to water the garden. The north is dry. Even if they have a well in their house, they cannot waste water. Because there is not much water in the well, and this well is not as deep as the outside well, it often runs out of water during droughts or deep winters. so we can only go out to fetch water from the big well outside or buy water from people who go to the streets to sell water. So since they came to the capital, they gradually got used to storing water. Especially since there is a small garden in their house, there are many places that need water. Sanya also brought water to pour it. Seeing the little ant looking at the garden in a daze, she followed along and asked, "Little ant, do you also want to pull up those unsightly flowers in the garden to grow vegetables?" Man Bao. She looked at Sanya in amazement, shook her head and said, "No, I think that spring is here, and it seems that you can enjoy peonies soon." She was wondering if she was going to find a few nasty candidates recently, sell them the beautiful peonies, make a lot of money, and find a way to buy more flowers, plants, and animals that she has never seen before, so that Keek can included to earn points to upgrade. In the past 2 years, the range of its scanning has increased, but it is still not enough. If the prince goes a little farther, he will not be able to scan. Although Sanya also likes beautiful flowers, she prefers more practical ones. Little ant, I also brought a few sections of wrapped yam vines and ginger pieces this time. Let's buy some medicinal herbs and vegetable seeds and plant them. Then you can make money. Man Bao said, "Li, are you really look like a second sister-in-law." Sanya pouted in dissatisfaction, "I'm obviously like my father." Man Bao turned around with the wooden basin and said, "I have no opinion. You can ask other people's opinions. This garden belongs to everyone." Sanya took it down and decided to seek everyone's opinions in a while. Man Bao sent the wooden basin back, and then went into the house and combed his hair carefully. When Zhou Lijun, who was passing by, saw it, he couldn't help but stop, leaning against the window for a while and then shaking his head. "Sister, don't bother, there are so many hairs, I'll tear you off in a while." She said, "Just wait, I'll help you comb in a while." Zhou Lijun packed himself up and came over to help Man Bao get a new hairstyle. Man Bao has a lot of jewelry, all of which are given by people. She has hardly bought jewelry for herself. Some jewelry is too expensive to wear at her age, but there are many that can be worn. Zhou Lijun abandoned the few beaded flowers she often wore, picked them up again, chose a bunch of gems to hang on her hair and fixed them, and asked, "Little ant, why are you dressed so beautifully today?" Some people say that in order to enlighten a person, you must have something on your body that he can notice, so that what you say can be heard by the other person. Man Baodao, he has too many hard-hearted people around him, so I decided to find another way. Beauty plan. Man Bao shook his head, "The crown princess is much prettier than me. It's not a beauty trick, it's just to make him notice me, look at me more, and then I'll talk to him again. But that's not the most important thing." "What's the main thing then?" "The most important thing is that she now has a feeling of fear when entering the palace. The prince's rebellion is much more terrifying than the Yazoo king's rebellion, especially when she is always approaching the prince. So she has to cherish the time when she is alive." Man Bao glanced at the various jewelry in the dressing box regretfully, and was heartbroken. "I was patronizing my studies before, but I forgot to dress myself well. After all, even if there is no such thing as the prince's rebellion, one day is one day less in life, so how can we lose our time?" Man Bao picked out a piece of jewelry that she didn't particularly like, put it in Zhou Lijun's hand, patted her hand and said, "Yeah, time is fleeting, you have to dress up more, you know." Zhou Lijun looked at the hairpin in his hand with a dazed expression. He just combed his hair, how could he get a hairpin? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1399. Zhou Lijun took it into his arms carefully, and said to Man Bao with a serious face, "Little ant, I will come to comb your hair every day from now on." Man Bao looked into her eyes through the bronze mirror, and instantly understood what she meant, and said, I don't have enough jewelry for you a day. It's all right, Zhou Lejun said righteously, little aunt, am I that kind of person? I comb your hair out of filial piety. God's filial piety, the two grew up together. Zhou Lejun is 2 years older than her, who doesn't know who. Man Bao went to eat breakfast in a beautiful suit, and everyone was stunned. Bai Shan was the first to come back to his senses. Seeing that Bai Erlang was still staring at her, he couldn't help but stretched out his foot and kicked him under the table. Don't look at him. Bai Erlang still stared at Man Bao, but he lowered his head and took a mouthful of porridge. He sighed, Man Bao has really grown up. Man Bao lifted his eyelids and glanced at him, and said, Junior brother has grown up a bit. Bai Erlang's mood was instantly bad, and Bai Shan's mood was not very good either. He lowered his head and pretended that he didn't exist. Mr. Zhuang, who was seated in the first place, couldn't help but smile and ordered some chopsticks. Eat it quickly, I'll send you to the Qiaozijian to report after eating, and we will go to school at an agreed time. It happened that Bai Dalan came from next door to have breakfast. He is still renting a small yard next door with his classmates. Since he is old, he often has to socialize, and his work and rest are different from Bai Shan and the others. Second, it's quieter over there. There are too many teenagers here. In the early morning, let alone here, he can feel the liveliness here from the next door. Reading is better. Before he bowed, he heard Mr. Zhuang's words. After bowing, he sat down and said, Sir, I asked Brother Su yesterday, and he said that the Emperor decided that the school will start on the 20th day. Mr. Zhuang raised his eyebrows, I thought they opened at 16. Today is 18, and the students of the Qiaozijian can report 2 days later, but if it is too late, the Qiaozijian will be held accountable, so they rushed to the capital in such a hurry. Bai Dalan said, according to the rules of previous years, it is true that 16 examinations are required, but this year, His Majesty wants to open INCO. Years ago, he has ordered the states to have a big test in April this year, and another big test in August. I heard that Confucius sacrificed wine and so on. The doctor began to worry about the publication of the book, so he set the start date of the school at 20. So this year they didn't say it too late, and they arrived early, although not a few days early. As soon as Mr. Zhuang heard this, he smiled and said, just right, let's go out today and find a suitable school for Lixiu and the others. As a parent, Man Bao thanked Mr. Zhuang and entrusted them to Mr. Zhuang. After eating breakfast, she went out with the medicine box. Bai Shan asked the coachman at home to take her to the palace. Dong Gong probably didn't expect that she would actually make the antidote in one day, so no one was sent to pick her up. Man Bao entered with the token given by the queen. The guards guarding the palace gate are very familiar with her. After all, she runs here every once in a while, either to see a doctor for the queen or the prince, and her access is second only to the adults who work in the imperial city. So I let her go after a simple inspection, and joked with her, Dr. Zhou Xiao, why didn't eunuch Wu come to pick you up today? Man Bao said, hurry up, I'm familiar with the road, so I can go by myself. The guard let go with a smile, and said, then Dr. Zhou goes slowly. Man Bao looked at the smiling young guard, nodded his head, and secretly said, the prince had better not have that thought. Must die. Man Bao carried the medicine box into the palace, and walked slowly along the city wall to the east palace. The patrolling guards and palace servants who met along the way just glanced at her, nodded slightly, and continued onward. A palace servant who was on the same road with her chased up from behind and wanted to carry the medicine box for her. This month, although Man Bao was not in the palace, Lu Yunu and the others occasionally practiced needles for the palace staff. Winter and spring are when the cold disease is prevalent. This year, fewer people moved from the palace to the epidemic prevention center than in previous years. There are also fewer people than in previous years. Everyone didn't say anything, but in their hearts they were very grateful to Man Bao. Although the medicine box is very heavy, there is an antidote for the prince in the medicine box at this time. Even if Keek is there, Man Bao would not dare to give it to others at will. In case of contamination of the potion, where will she get another copy for the prince for a while? Therefore, Man Bao declined the kindness of the palace servants and continued to walk along the palace wall. When he arrived at the gate of the East Palace, he found that the gate of the East Palace was actually closed, so Man Bao knocked on the door. The guard in the East Palace opened the door and was startled when he saw Man Bao, and immediately stepped back to let Man Bao enter. Man Bao asked, "Why is the door closed during the day?" The voice just fell, and she vaguely heard the noise, and Man Bao looked suspiciously. The guard lowered his voice and said, "His Royal Highness is getting angry. Dr. Zhou Xiao, do you want to take a break before going over?" Man Bao was stunned for a moment and then said, "No, I'll go take a look." Man Bao went to the backyard of the East Palace very well. The prince was smashing things in the main courtyard, and when she entered the courtyard, she heard the sound of crackling, and the palace people were hiding in the courtyard. Wu Gonggong stood outside the door and lowered his head to wipe the sweat on his forehead. His apprentice pulled his sleeves, and when he turned around, he was shocked to see Man Bao. "Dr. Zhou, why are you entering the palace today, and His Highness didn't said to pick you up?" Man Bao said, "It was agreed that the needle would come up every other day, so I came." Man Bao probed into the room and saw nothing, so he asked, "What's wrong?" Eunuch Wu wiped his sweat and lowered his voice. "Yesterday morning, Lord Wang mentioned that the princess has no heir, and asked His Majesty to choose a good wife for the prince, and the royal family also asked Duke Pai to be more generous. There was a quarrel in the main hall yesterday. Who would know that today, Lord Wang, he would not hesitate to bring this matter up again." "Man Bao, where are you talking about the crown princess? It's obviously a secret to the crown prince. Has the princess never found a woman for the prince? There used to be a lot of people in the East Palace. In the beginning, the prince had no children, and everyone thought it was the prince's problem, but with so many women in the East Palace, none of them could be born, and it was a question of who it was. What's more, although the prince's problem has not been announced to the world, it is also an open secret. Everyone doesn't talk about it, but they are very clear in their hearts." Carrying the medicine box, Man Bao asked, "Then I have to wait outside?" Eunuch Wu is also uncertain, mainly because the prince is moody during this time, especially these few days. It is common to suddenly lose his temper, so he is not sure whether Zhou Mankai will change or not go in at this time. The two stood outside the door and looked at each other. The prince roared inside, "What are you doing outside? Let Gu come in." Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1400. Eunuch Wu and Man Bao glanced at each other, knowing that they were called, and went in immediately. As soon as he entered the door, Man Bao felt that he had nowhere to stay. The ground was full of broken pieces of porcelain and scattered tables, chairs, and benches. The princess sat cross-legged on the high chair with a cup of tea by her hand. Except where she sat, everything in the room was basically smashed by the prince. Man Bao twitched the corners of his mouth. "This is really thorough enough, saying that this porcelain is very expensive, right?" When the crown princess saw Man Bao, there was some hope in her eyes. She immediately put down her feet and stood up, not caring about the broken pieces of porcelain on the ground. Said, "Dr. Zhou Xiao is here, please take your seat." Turning her head and seeing that there was no place to sit in the room, the crown princess smiled and said, "Your Highness, why don't you move my little study?" The prince had already made a fuss. He snorted coldly, his mood calmed down a lot, turned around and left. Eunuch Wu hurriedly followed behind to wait on him. The crown princess held Man Bao tightly and pulled her to follow. The group changed to the small study room of the princess next door, and Eunuch Wu brewed a new pot of tea attentively. The prince frowned at him and waved, "Go down." Eunuch Wu bent down and stepped back, took everyone in the room away, closed the door and guarded it from a distance in person. There were only 3 people in the room, and the prince looked at Man Bao sarcastically and asked, "Why, did you make the antidote so quickly?" Man Bao nodded, "It's done." The prince was stunned, did he really do it? But the crown princess got excited, took Man Bao's hand and said, "It's great, you don't know, after you took the stone away the night before, I'll wash your highness's hair, his highness's hair." The crown princess said this for a while, her eyes turned red, and she pressed the corner of her eyes with a handkerchief and did not speak. Man Bao subconsciously looked at the prince's hair and asked, "Did you lose your hair?" The prince's face was very ugly. The crown princess didn't want to hide her illness, she nodded and said, "I just rubbed it lightly, and the hair fell out a lot." Man Bao didn't expect it to be so serious, but according to teacher Mo, it was just an impact. She quickly comforted the 2 of them, "It's okay, fortunately there is no nosebleed." Man Bao opened the medicine box and took out a porcelain bottle to give to the prince. "This is the antidote, after drinking it, go out to practice swordsmanship, or dance, anyway, you will sweat, after sweating, take a shower and sleep. Feel fine." The prince took the porcelain bottle, raised his eyebrows and asked, "It's that simple?" Man Bao nodded, "His Royal Highness has been in contact with this stone for a while, so just take the medicine to reject it." The prince opened the cork, glanced inside, and was stunned for a moment, thinking that he had read it wrong, so he poured the tea in the tea bowl and poured the medicine inside into the bowl. The princess looked down and was stunned. The couple stared blankly at the blue water and were quite surprised. "Is this the antidote?" Man Bao nodded, "Yes, it's the antidote." She looked at the prince with an encouraging face, "His Royal Highness, let's drink." The prince raised his head to look at Man Bao, and then looked down at the strange potion. He picked it up and smelled it. He found that the antidote had no smell at all. It looks even weirder. The prince lit the porcelain bowl and asked, "How is this antidote made?" Man Bao couldn't help scratching his head, "Sorry, he came out too early today, and forgot to ask Bai Shan if he had worked out his mysterious prescription." Man Bao looked at the prince innocently with wide eyes. The prince stared at her for a while, but didn't ask any further questions. After thinking for a while, he raised his head and drank the medicine. The crown princess on the side also looked at him nervously. After a while, seeing that he didn't react at all, she asked, "How does your highness feel?" The prince frowned, "I don't feel it at all, but this medicine does have a strange smell. It's not bitter, but it has a cool feeling." Man Bao said, "Would you like to go out and sweat?" The prince glanced at Man Bao, turned around to open the door, and let Eunuch Wu take his sword. He danced the sword directly in the courtyard. Man Bao and the crown princess stood under the porch to watch him practice swordsmanship. Not to mention, the crown prince was still very heroic. Man Bao turned his head to look at the crown princess, thinking about whether she was going to inquire about the crown prince's mind, when the crown princess suddenly turned to look at her and said with a smile, "Dr. Zhou Xiao today is very different from before, really pretty." It was only then that Man Bao remembered that he had changed his hairstyle and headdress today. In other words, the prince didn't seem to have noticed it just now. Alas, as expected, Ame is a girl. Man Bao Kong raised a smile to the crown princess and praised the crown princess's makeup. "The crown princess is also very good looking today." The crown princess reached out and touched her cheeks, then smiled lightly, "I'm old, I'm not as fresh as you guys." Man Bao blinked, "Are you old?" Niang looks so young." The princess raised her lips and smiled. Seeing that the prince had moved to the other side of the rockery, she said, "I didn't expect Dr. Zhou Xiao to make an antidote so quickly, so the prince and I will have children." Man Bao nodded affirmatively, as long as His Royal Highness and Niang Niang follow the doctor's orders, there will be. For some unknown reason, a warm current poured into the heart of the Crown Princess. If the day before yesterday she was like falling into an ice cave, and yesterday her heart was like ashes, then today is a little spark in the ashes. She looked at Man Bao steadily, both of them swallowed nervously, and the Crown Princess whispered, "Okay, I believe you." Man Bao took the time to ask in a low voice, "What about His Royal Highness?" The princess turned her head to look at the cold prince, who didn't speak for a long time. Seriously, she doesn't know either. So she didn't answer Joe Man. The pressure on the Crown Prince is much heavier than that of the Crown Prince, and the damage he has suffered is greater. The Crown Prince can't say anything to Joe Man now. Man Bao no longer asked. The two stood under the porch and watched the prince dance 2 sets of swordsmanship. He came back with the sword dripping with sweat and was panting. "Prepare hot water, I want to take a bath." Here Eunuch Wu hurriedly bowed and retreated from the arrangement. The prince changed the water twice, and when he came out, there was steam on his face and body, like steamed shrimp. His eyes were lowered, and he fell asleep on the soft couch without saying a few words. The princess was very worried when she saw it. Man Bao comforted her and said, "It's okay, it's normal, I can give him acupuncture now." Man Bao has already paid points for Keek to scan again, and the data obtained is that the rejection effect is particularly good. The prince's body has not been polluted, so the effect of the potion is very good, and even because the potion has some repairing effect, his body has been repaired. Man Bao looked at the scanned data, touched his chin and thought about it, the potion that her mother once drank. Man Bao opened them all with consciousness, and found the potion again. She looked at the potion, looked down at the prince, and couldn't help but glanced at the potion again. By the way, why didn't she remember it?